Warm welcome to our web panel today on gender and mining. My name is Jennifer Rietbergen-McCracken. I'm a senior advisor with the Responsible Mining Foundation, which is an independent research organisation based here in Switzerland. And I would first like to say how wonderful it is to see so many people joining us today from all over the world. And I wish you a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on where you are. And we would very much encourage you to participate in today's session, and you can ask questions using the little question icon that is at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer or a tablet, or at the top of your screen if you're using a mobile phone. We will try to cover as many questions as possible, but we won't be able to answer them all. So if we don't get to yours, please feel free to contact us afterwards for more information. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Surya Deva, who will be moderating our panel and sharing his own reflections on gender issues. Surya is professor with the City University of Hong Kong and also a member of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. And Surya has been leading the group's work on gender over the last years. So without further ado, I will hand over to Surya to lead our discussion.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, and hello everyone, to all the participants joining this webinar. It's really a great pleasure for me to moderate this very distinguished panel of experts representing different stakeholders, and I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation. In my view, mining and women, they share kind of an uneasy relationship with so many dimensions. And I think the index finding, the responsible mining index findings highlight those. And I think Jennifer will share some of those findings shortly. But I mean, it is very well documented that the women experience differentiated and disproportionate impact of mining activities all over the world. There is a serious issue of underrepresentation of women in the mining sector. This is a huge contrast from the garment sector, for instance, where it is overrepresentation of women. In the mining, it is a serious issue about underrepresentation. Then there are issues about women may not be getting compensation if they are displaced from a land which is used for mining for a number of reasons. One could be that they don't have the title over the land. And of course, there are issues about sexual harassment and sexual violence in this particular sector. So in this particular context, this conversation around embedding gender in the context of responsible mining is really a welcome initiative, and I very much look forward to this conversation. So what we are going to do is, I'm going to introduce the 5 panelists, and then I'm going to pose them a question each, and they'll be sharing their reflections in response to that question. And then I will take some questions from the participants, and that's why I will welcome all of you to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to see as much as questions as possible. And then I will go to the second round of questions. In the first round, we focus on highlighting the challenges from different perspectives, the kind of the storytelling narrative. And in the second round, we look at good practices, recommendations, and the solutions of those challenges. But let me introduce in one go all the 5 distinguished panelists. So we have Jennifer Rietbergen-McCracken. She is a senior advisor at the Responsible Mining Foundation and based in Switzerland. Then we have Vanessa Baudin. She is a project manager at Development Gateway and based in Senegal. Then we have Ms. Daria Goncharova. She is Chief Sustainability Officer at Polymetal, Russia. Then we have Lydia Nkopane. She's a chairperson of Women Structure of the National Union of Mineworkers and based in South Africa. Last but not least, we have Prabindra Shakya, and he's an Indigenous human rights defender and also chairperson at the Community Empowerment and Social Justice and currently based in Nepal. So Jennifer, if I may start with you, and can you share with us, to set the scene, the methodology that you have adopted and the key findings of your 2020 RMI report, especially in relation to gender equality? And what do you see in your findings to promote gender responsive mining? You have the floor, Jennifer. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Surya. Just to give you a bit of background, first of all, the Responsible Mining Index reports are produced every 2 years by RMF, the Responsible Mining Foundation, and the foundation starts from the position that responsible mining should benefit the economies, improve the lives of peoples, and respect the environment of producing countries, while allowing for companies to make a fair and viable return. And the RMI reports cover these 6 areas that encompass economic, environmental, social, and governance issues. And gender as a transversal issue is integrated across the assessment framework. This slide has a lot of information, but basically the shaded countries show the global scope of the RMI report 2020, which assesses 38 large-scale mining companies and the selection of their mine sites. And the final few words about the assessment itself. It is evidence-based, meaning that any answer to a question has to be backed up by documentary evidence. It is based on publicly available information, either sourced by the analysts or provided by the companies. And it is based on what society can reasonably expect of mining companies, drawing on RMF's extensive consultations with a wide range of stakeholders in producing countries around the world. If we look at the 16 metric questions that deal with gender issues, we see the overall results for these 38 companies are very low. Each bar on this chart represents one company, and we can see that the average score comes out at less than 10%. I think we can say that we were surprised about just how low those results are, given the huge attention being paid to gender globally and the various initiatives on gender in mining in particular. And if we begin to unpack these results, we can look first at gender action within mining companies themselves. And here we see on the left-hand side chart that much of the action taken by mining companies relates to trying to improve the gender diversity of their boards and within their senior management teams, which is all well and good. But in contrast, we see on the right-hand chart that few companies, very few companies in fact, are making special efforts to ensure that their women workers are provided with gender-appropriate PPE, which is, of course, a much more fundamental issue of health and safety at the mine site level. And perhaps even more strikingly, we see here that there's a generalized lack of action on protecting women workers from harassment and gender-based violence. And this while studies and surveys continue to show that these risks are still a daily reality for many women mining workers. Turning now to look at gender action within mining affected communities, here we see that less than half of the companies are ensuring that their community engagement activities reach out to women as well as men. And when it comes to benefit sharing, we see a similar picture. And here, for example, in local procurement, we see in the yellow or orange bars that most of the companies are doing something to address and to develop local procurement opportunities, but only a handful of them are making special efforts to make sure that women entrepreneurs are included. And this final chart shows actually one of the lowest scoring questions of the whole assessment, which simply asks, are mining companies conducting regular assessments of the impacts of their activities on women? And the answer is pretty clear. So in a nutshell, we can say that, or we can see that gender action by mining companies, where it matters most, is still the exception to the norm. And at RMF, we are encouraging continuous improvement on gender action. And in doing this, as in with other issues, we seek to drive improvement across the whole industry as a whole, and not just among the mining companies that we assess. And we do this, for example, by engaging with companies and mining associations and encouraging them to use the learning tools that are within the RMI reports. So, for example, we identify and we summarize about 70 examples of leading practices that we found among the companies, and we make that available on the website. And we also make available all the source documents that we used in the assessment, And in the case of the RMI Report 2020, this amounts to nearly 4,000 documents. So any company, or in fact anybody, can go onto the website and find, for example, what a real-life gender equality policy looks like, or what one company is doing to develop training programs for local women. And we found in the feedback we received from mining companies that they find these tools and these resources quite helpful in seeing how they can develop their own performances and ultimately become better businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I think that was very useful in terms of both highlighting where the gaps are and where the company should go in future in terms of embedding gender. But I think more critically also document good practices. I think this is because sometimes companies would like to know how to do it. I think that's why this good practices compilation could be very useful. Now let me turn to now the second panelist. So Vanessa, if I may turn to you now. I understand that you have been involved in developing Women in Mining Index in Guinea. So can you please tell us a little bit more about this initiative, when this initiative did start, what was the objective, what motivated you to start this initiative, and who are the main users of this initiative? Thank you. You have the floor now.
Thank you, Surya, and good morning, afternoon to all. So the Women in Mining Pilot Index in Guinea started when Development Gateway was actually conducting an assessment in Senegal, Guinea, in Nigeria, to really assess the feasibility of installing open data portals on extractive industries in those three countries. And in the particular case of Guinea, we were given the opportunity to meet with Women in Mining Guinea. And they shared that they had an ongoing, let's say, project or idea, even though it was on hold, had been on hold for a few months when we actually met with them. And we said, okay, well, I think Development Gateway can help. And the main purpose of the index, it was for them to really understand how they can improve the life of women, especially in the mining community. So Guinea is a very rich country when it comes to mineral resources. So we did another more technical and more precise assessment where we met some stakeholders, whether private companies, government agencies, communities. And though we were able to confirm some ideas that we already had, let's say that women were indeed victims of any type of harassment in the workplace. We did not have that many women in mining companies in Guinea. We also understood something else that I think that was some of the main findings of the assessment. One is that women actually spontaneously refuse some corporate or business opportunities. And the main reason is actually the social and the cultural sector they evolve in. And this has a very high impact actually on their involvement in the mining sector, whether it is at corporate level or in other like business instances. Another thing also that we found is that Guinea has a very strong legal framework with very clear information and quotas of how many nationals should be employed in like private companies. And one thing that private companies shared with us is even if we wanted to hire the local capacity, even if we wanted to actually to hire the women in our mining companies, the local capacity is not available. So we went to the National Institute of Bouquet and gathered also some information there and realized that the attendance level for women, it's in some cases below 10%, and some of them do not even complete their studies. So that was actually very insightful for us. And we decided, though, to build a pilot index. So this is only phase 1. But build a pilot index, let's say, that will be strong enough to showcase the potential of such a tool, and also its relevance at country level, because every country has a different social, cultural, religious, let's say, context. And it's very important to actually take that into account when developing a tool like that, to make sure that we are really targeting what needs to be targeted to make sure that women are more involved in this sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. That was very useful. And I think that also provides the local context, as you mentioned it, So RMI is looking at major companies in different continents across countries, and you try to unpack it. But I think it was also striking that some of the issues are very common. So the issues that you found in Guinea, in a way, were not unique. I'm sure those issues are also reflected in the RMI index report. So I think that is something we can come back later. So I would now like to move to the next panelist, and Daria, if I may move to you now. And you are one of the companies which is part of this RMI index report, Polymetal. So if you can share with us what challenges your company has experienced in making mining an attractive career option for women, because Vanessa also highlighted that women may not wish to take those opportunities, right? So did you face those challenges where you would like to have more women in the company, but for certain reasons, they're not willing to take up those opportunities? And what concrete steps your company took to encourage them to join more and ensure gender equality? You have the floor now, Daria. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. Can you hear me well, right?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, just to give you a context, we are operating in Russia and Kazakhstan. Polymetal is the top 10 global gold producer, top 5 global cereal producer. And what previous speaker mentioned is completely the same in our countries when women just reject promoting. So of course we have to work with psychology first rather than with the career opportunities. So of course in our countries mining is dominated by men traditionally, and it continues to be associated with men stereotypes. And however, we are working to gradually shift the balance. And now we started to see more women interested in careers, in engineering, in surveying. And my mom is a surveyor, my father is mining engineer. So like they gave me the example that it is possible for women to work in mining, even as a worker. And we started to involve more women into extraction positions, and our goal is gradually increase gender diversity, so men also can accept women positively among the personnel. We are focusing now on inclusion of women across our workforce, because we have only 21% among our workforce who are females. And we are creating leadership teams. We identified key positions where female representation needs to be improved and started to work there. These areas are like surveying, geology, technical positions, and truck driving. And interestingly, since we started to work on that, we had a request from a group of women, a worker brigade, saying that asking us to hire them, but the only condition was that they work only women and they work together as a truck drivers at our mine. And we accepted this challenge, and it is amazing brigade. We're happy for this team, and ladies are really carefully driving, and equipment is in the perfect condition. So we are basically very, very happy to accept this kind of opportunities coming from the bottom up to the employer. And we have a talent pool program, which works really well when women can have a promotion after the education program. We started, of course, also to monitor and survey employees, checking if they have gender stereotypes. And before the Corona lockout, we started to have a very good diversity trainings, helping to defend women from bias, and especially during the recruitment, and to also help women to see a perspective in mining industry. Polymetal, together with Deloitte and Norilsk-Nickel, established Women in Mining Russia in February, where we handled these problems such as bias, and we are working on attracting youngsters and students, showing them that starting from the school time that mining has a potential for them. And of course, we are tackling the problems on parenting, giving women more insurance with babies to work for us. So I hope this panel will help to inform people on opportunities and attract miners in Russia and Kazakhstan as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Daria. And I think that also provides a concrete context that how companies can try to involve more women into their sector in different roles, not just in one part of the mining industry. So thank you for sharing that. Now I would like to move on to the next panelist, Lydia. So if I can ask you, as the chairperson of women structure of the National Union of Mine Workers in South Africa, can you please tell us the key challenges that workers, especially women workers, face in the mining industry based on your experience in South Africa, and what your union has done to deal with those challenges so far? You have the floor, Lydia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me this morning in this panel. Firstly, I will start by giving a little background, saying that there are three key elements that underpin the importance of discussing broadly the treatment of women in the workplace, especially mining industry. The first one, which I would like to say, is that women are newcomers in this industry, which is a male-dominated sector, which are driven by male dominance and embedded in a patriarchal system of our society. That is to start with. The second one is these mines are traditionally a workplace environment which was designed around men, including the change rooms and other setups in the workplace. The third one is that women have special needs due to their different biological builds. And the health and safety needs of women require new adjustment in the workplace to accommodate women's specific needs. And this it includes the protective clothing in the mining industries. Having said that, the challenges which women have faced to start with is proper PPE, which is protective clothing for women. Those PPE were designed for male, and in other companies, they are still using them as they are. The other challenge which women are faced with is abuse. It comes in many forms. There's sexual harassment, which women, when they need higher positions, had to be harassed. And the other one, it's even verbal abuse. They are called in names. If I can mention one, they are called bitch. Those are the terms, the words which they are called as women. The other big issue which women are faced with the challenge is discrimination in decision-making position. Women are not in a position of making decisions. whereby all decisions are taken and women are excluded. And the other thing, it's lack of promotions. Women are stuck in one position because they are saying that they are not experienced. Those are the key main issues which women are still faced. And this is a big challenge for the trade unions. Women are also faced with bosses which are having power struggles because they see that they are in these positions. Being in the position they are in, they're using their power to discriminate women. That is the key position, which they are afraid that women are gonna get their positions. They are taking women as a threat. Those are key challenges which women are still faced in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And I think these findings, I'm sure, will resonate also with the index and surveys that were discussed by the other panelists earlier. Now, we have so far talked about the impact on women and the workers. But mining sector has also impact on the wider community. And one community that we would like to discuss in particular today is the indigenous peoples. So, Prabindra, if I can ask you that in your experience, how are the mining projects impacting indigenous communities, and whether mining companies in your experience are trying to consult or talk to the indigenous women in particular before starting a project, during the project. So what is your experience of this meaningful engagement with the indigenous women? You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya, and greetings and Jojalapa to everyone on the webinar. First, the context, a little bit of context that I'm based in Nepal. I belong to the Indigenous Newar group of Nepal, and though mining is not a big issue or like a major industry in Nepal, most of the experiences that I'm sharing in response to Surya's question come from my work over the past decade with indigenous working for promoting and protecting the rights of indigenous peoples at regional and international levels with indigenous peoples organizations and as well as the UN, particularly as with the human rights program of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact. So the experiences that I'll be talking about, I'll be sharing, are mainly documented in a book, in a report that was published by Asia Indigenous Peoples Pact in 2013 titled Mining the Womb of the Earth, Struggles of Indigenous Women Against Destructive Mining. That report documented many cases, a few cases from Philippines, Indonesia, Laos, and also we had other cases of human rights challenges that indigenous communities faced in various Asian countries, particularly those 3 countries, as well as India, Cambodia, with respect to mining industry. And one thing that was common among all these cases was exactly what Surya referred to in his second part with regards to consultation. The engagement of indigenous peoples with mining companies should start from the outset of the design of a mining project. But what we found in our experiences or working with these indigenous communities is that there was often no consultation at all. Negotiations often take place in the capital of the country where indigenous peoples have very little representation, and the companies or the government often come up with a negotiated agreement that are brought to indigenous communities without any say to them. And that gets even worse when particularly the communities don't even have any desire or seek any mining project in their area, particularly because of myriad of reasons. One of the common reasons is that they don't see their land as a commodity. something that should be dug up to take out financial commodity. They have more spiritual connection with the land. So that's one thing. Then the second thing is they see a greater value of the protection of the environment than the mining industry, and than the impacts, than what is caused by the impacts of the mining industry. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is often what they already see is that these mining companies or other business projects tend to entrench what is already inequalities, what is already existing historical inequalities against them in a state system. So in a nutshell, what's basically there in terms of engagement of indigenous communities is total and utter neglect of their right to self-determination, which by virtue of which indigenous communities should be able to determine their local development priorities. So that's often lacking the most. While working with AIPP, we had these Indigenous Human Rights Defenders Network, and they would submit us cases of human rights violations in their communities. And mining was, again, one of the three major business areas that contributed to various human rights violations against Indigenous communities. Displacement was one of those. Dispossession of resources was the second one, or losing the loss of access to their resources. And again, repression. When communities revolt or resist against those such destructive mining, repression using state security forces or militarization was again a repeating phenomenon. Now, why this happens often with indigenous communities again is because, indigenous communities, though a small population, around 5 to 6% of the world's population, of the global population, still occupy or own more than 20% of the world's of the Earth's territories, which are rich in minerals and other resources, forests, minerals, water resources, and that is often why indigenous peoples are often victimized in the course of mining projects. As I said, the report, the 2013 report of AIPP well documents indigenous women's perspectives or struggles against destructive mining. And I don't mean to represent or speak on behalf of mansplain, let's say, indigenous women's perspectives, but I would like to share some particular aspects of how indigenous women are how indigenous women are affected by these kind of mining projects, which are irresponsible or not responsible per se with regards to the standards set by Responsible Mining Index 2. So often indigenous women are food producers, family nurturers in their communities. That is their traditional role, which is often, which can often be portrayed as patriarchal communities too. But when there is a harmful mining project introduced in that community, they face additional difficulties to fulfill their roles as food producers and family nurturers in their community. There is changes in the ways of life and livelihoods. They don't have lands to till anymore, or there is the water sources are polluted, so they have to travel further to get water. They get very little opportunities to get employment in the mining industry. Mining industry is also very infamous to have to accompany with prostitution in the communities where there is mine sites. So these disproportionately affect indigenous women, and in turn even entrench or increase the gender-based discrimination that is often pre-existing in indigenous communities. Loss of traditional knowledge is one of the key issues too. I'm just finishing here. Loss of traditional knowledge is one of the key issues too, because with the loss of their access to resources and lands, the key importance of the knowledge that they hold, the women hold in particular to their natural resources management, is often lost, and that has impact not only for their community but for the wider environment. So those are the impacts that the women see. And as I said, when there is no consultation with the indigenous community, which are often patriarchal, indigenous women often have even less say in designing a mining project or implementing a mining project. I'll just stop there for now.
Okay, thank you, Prabindra, for the first round of interventions. So now I've got some interesting questions from the virtual floor. And I'm going to pick some questions and direct it to different panelists. I have a couple of questions which I would like to direct to Vanessa. Vanessa, there's one question about that when do you think this Women in Mining Index in Guinea is going to be published? So the question says Nigeria, but I think the index is about Guinea, right? Not Nigeria. So if you can answer that question. There's one more question from Monica, which I think you may be interested to answer, and that is about how can we support more women-owned businesses and women entrepreneurs to get more contracts in the mining industry. So if you get any perspectives on that, and I give you a little bit of time to think about this question, and I answer a question very quickly myself. There is a question from Frederick, and she is asking about, do you think that the international initiatives like the voluntary principles or the OECD due diligence guidance, they take gender issues enough? And I would invite you to look at the working group's report on this, in which we, for instance, reviewed the OECD due diligence guidelines. They make a starting point on integrating gender issues, but I think that much more could be done about it. So, Vanessa, if I may ask you to answer these questions now, and be brief so that we can take more questions. Thank you.
No problem. As far as the first question is concerned, relating to when is the index going to be published, it already is actually. It was officially launched in January 2020. I will gladly share the link with you. It's in French though, I'm sorry. This is just the pilot. And given the time constraints, we can do much more than this, but this is something that we're hoping to do. As far as the other question related to how we can bring more women entrepreneurs to respond to some opportunities, one thing that was said in Guinea particularly is that some of the conditions like bids and tenders that were published had too harsh, they became prohibitive at the end of the day, and because they had too many obligations or too many requirements, and those requirements have appeared to not include all those mostly foods and services, goods and services, small businesses that were run by women. So one thing that I can share is maybe make it less restrictive and make it a little bit more general so that women are have the incentive to actually apply to those.
Thank you so much. That was very good and sharp answer as well. Thank you so much. I would like to take a question from Glenn. Glenn has asked several questions, but I'll just pick this one. And probably this may be relevant for Lydia. Lydia, if you could try to answer this question. So Glenn is asking that beyond the RMI findings, how can social actors improve and drive performance? How can we leverage together as social actors between workers and trade unions and communities in particular? So Lydia, that is a question for you. And to give you a little bit of time to think, I also read the question which I would like to pose to Jennifer. I don't know if that is a question you are in a position to answer, but there are several points raised by Pablo. And basically, Pablo is interested in Chinese companies' footprint in the mining sectors in relation also to the Belt and Road Initiative. So Jennifer, if you would like to answer that question, and you can also look at the questions in the box. There are several components of it. So if you would like to answer that question, but I give the floor first to Lydia about how can we leverage together to make change. Lydia, you have the floor.
Thank you. I think what we need to do is that I must say that trade unions are trying their level best in terms of making the industry to be diverse. And there are a lot of legislations which are in place, but the thing is that there's lack of implementation in all those legislations. But what needs to happen is that monitoring, I think it's key. Evaluation and monitoring of all the legislation which are in place, taking also the collective bargaining agreements which are in place in terms of PPE, in terms of women to be placed in correct positions. We've got mining charter, which is in place, which is not implemented. And in terms of sexual harassment, I think there are policies which are in place in various companies, but they are not implemented. So my take on that is to say that there is, it's supposed to be more monitoring and evaluation each time, timelessly, to ensure that these companies, they comply. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. And before I give the floor to Jennifer, I would like to read the question that I would like to pose to Daria. Daria, there's a question asked by Donald in the question answer, and he is asking that can someone reflect on the entire mining value chain and positioning women at every stage so that we can see where critical entry points for interventions can begin making substantial difference? Because if we want to empower women, bring more gender equality, we should look at not merely mining as a compartment, but because you have a supply chain, you have a whole apparatus in operations, right? So how can we integrate women across those value chains? If you can share your experience of Polymetal, and you have time to think, I go to Jennifer now. Jennifer, if you want to respond to that question about Chinese companies' footprint. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you. So to answer that question, at least partially, Pablo, I would direct you to the RMI report website 2022, and we can share the link with you afterwards as well. But there we include several Chinese mining companies, including Zijin and China Xuanhua, and you can see their producing countries on an interactive map, and you can go to some of the specific results of their mine sites. And I would say that in general, what we have found, and we have found a whole range of performances, and even among those companies which you might expect to be performing at a lower level than their peers, I think we have found a level of interest in the results of the RMI. And so, for example, Chinese companies are among those companies where we are seeing offers and not offers, but requests for debriefing calls after the results. So they want to know more about how the results have come about, what it is they can do to improve their performances, and to learn more about engaging in the future. So we are seeing an encouraging level of engagement from companies all over the world, and we're seeing this as a constructive way to actually drive better performance among companies in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And if I may give the floor to Daria now.
Yeah, sure. That's an interesting question because we try to monitor our supply chain in terms of if the business belongs to man or woman, but not all businesses are sharing this information, obviously. And it's also against constitution of Russia and Kazakhstan, which we have to comply with to select on the basis of gender the business. So we had to, kind of go over the system and try to work with the school kids and university students in order to facilitate the startups or some inclusion in economical life in communities. And most of the women find our webinars on financial strategy or some just educating trainings very helpful. So they believe in their skills and they try themselves. So we just monitor them and give them the opportunities to participate in our tenders among suppliers. And it's not sometimes easy to control or to follow all the suppliers because we have thousands and thousands, but we are happy for the small progresses selected women are doing in communities. And also, of course, we hope for the long-term future development of the businesses in Russia and Kazakhstan overall, because our mines are located so far away. There are no people, not even women or men, like indigenous communities are not always settled in one place. So for us, it's just a always the challenge to find someone to work with who is reliable, and if it's woman, it's even better. So this is how we work for now.
Okay, thank you, Daria. So Prabindra, I hope you're not feeling left out. So I have a question for you as well. And the question is from Enith. And the question is that what measures do you think can be put in place to get the decision makers consider the opinion of indigenous people while taking decisions? And I also have a request to Pierre, if he's in the background listening. There's a request made by Farnaz that how can we reach out to each panelist after we can finish this webinar. So if you can perhaps post the email addresses, I don't know, or some other way to respond to this request. Pierre, that is for you. I give the floor to Prabindra now.
Yeah, it's an important question. It's $1 million question actually, but what the primary challenge that indigenous communities face with respect to having their say in decision making in mining or other industries is the challenge that they face for most of their other rights, that is non-recognition of their rights to their land, territories and resources. Many countries, particularly in Asia, do not recognize indigenous peoples altogether. I mean, as distinct groups that hold collective rights with regards to international standards or international human rights law. And so in their legislative framework, they do not have adequate protections for the collective lands or tenure systems of indigenous peoples. And that is what often is exploited by mining or other industries. So yeah, I mean, if the first step to have the access to it, the first step to facilitate access of indigenous peoples to decision making would be to ensure their rights to their lands, territories and resources in legislation, as well as effective implementation of those legislation. But what I think is, the mining companies, even in lack of such domestic legal framework, should be undertaking proactive measures in line with the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The UN Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights requires companies to respect human rights in line with international human rights law. So that doesn't mean just limiting themselves to what is in the domestic legal framework. So the mining companies should be upholding the best practices, should be looking at international human rights law, human rights standards, and making proactive measures to identify indigenous peoples, assess the impacts that happen on indigenous peoples, including indigenous women through gender impact assessments, as Jennifer said earlier, which is very often lacking in with mining companies or even other companies. There are also good practices. Yeah, some agribusiness companies have recently been, or like some agribusiness companies with support of NGOs have recently been doing community-based impact assessments, which have been useful to identify what impacts does community see, besides these traditional environmental impact assessments that only look at fauna, flora and impacts on flora and fauna. So those are some of the things I think could be done to make sure that indigenous peoples have their say in decision making with regards to mining. But I think, again, the first thing would be that the companies make sure that they reach out to the communities at the outset, not when they have started digging holes or started bulldozing lands, but at the outset of the mining project itself, to see if the communities are receptive of their idea and they give their consent to the mining project.
Thank you very much, Prabindra. And you mentioned about UN guiding principles, and I think that provides me a good connection to the gender guidance that the working group developed. And I would like to invite all the participants, if you're not aware of the gender guidance for the UN guiding principles, to have a look at this document. Probably we can share the link in the chat box or in Q&A. Pierre, again, a request for you. So I think the starting point of the gender guidance is that if businesses are expected to respect human rights, then they have to understand that all the rights holders are not a homogeneous group. So women may be impacted differently from men, and even within women, all women are not impacted in the same way. We have to keep in mind the issue of intersectionality. So race, religion, caste, education, indigenous nature, disability, LGBTI status, so many factors are interwoven, which may make it complicated. And that's why this report provides two pathways for both states and businesses to consider a gender integration into their responses. It develops a gender framework, and the gender framework is a generic framework which has 3-step cycles. So first step is there should be gender responsive assessment on the part of states as well as companies. The second step is there should be gender transformative measures. And I think these choice of words responsive and transformative is intentional, because we would like governments and businesses to do transformation. And transformation is not possible unless we change the patriarchal values, unless we question the formal equality, which may think fine, but we need to go beyond formal equality and achieve substantive equality. And that's why the affirmative action may be relevant. And finally, there should be gender transformative remedies that the guidance provides. For instance, if a particular mining company is receiving a lot of complaints about sexual harassment or gender-based violence, so the company should look at the systematic region. That what are the systemic reasons for this? Why is it happening? So do we need to change the managers who are males? Do we need to change the power structures also in terms of trade unions and labor unions? What else do we need to do? And do we need to change some social and cultural norms which may normalize those kind of behaviors? So what needs to change? So unless companies and governments are working together to change this, we may not be able to achieve those successes, I think. The other thing which the gender guidance does, it provides concrete gender guidance for each of the 31 principles. I will not go into this, but I would invite you to look at some of those issues later. The interesting questions keep coming. I will flag these questions to some of the panelists now so that you get time to think about your responses. So there's a very interesting question, probably Prabindra for you. And the question is that indigenous communities are also patriarchal. So what is the best way to promote women empowerment within indigenous communities? So a question for you to consider later. And a question that I would like to flag for Jennifer is that you talk about the impact on women in the mining sector. What about artisanship in the mining sector? So whether you survey artisanship, small minings where those particular situations. So do you have any insights on this, especially if the case women hand workers, or we are talking about two different worlds here, the artisan mines and the other mines. So, or can we draw some similarities and learn from RMI report on this? With this context, and I would also like to move to the second round of questions, where I would invite the panelists again to kind of respond in terms of the solutions. We discussed some solutions already, but I would like to focus a little bit more on solutions, recommendations, good practices, your experiences that you have so far. And if Jennifer, if I may start with you, and my question to you is, what good practice examples you have discovered in your 2020 report, and what else should companies do to mainstream gender into their operations? Over to you, and if you want to touch upon the artisan mine question as well, it's up to you. You have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. Just briefly comment on the ASM, artisanal and small scale mining question first of all. The RMI looks at how large scale mining companies are interacting with ASM operations in their vicinity of their operations. That's one area that we do cover. So other than that, I would say that within our ASM operations, women often make up a large proportion of the workers. So there are definitely many of the same issues that would arise in ASM operations. And one off the top of my head would be the whole thing on health and safety, given the precarious situation of some of the operations, and that women as well as men are putting their lives at risk in some cases. Going back now to the positive signs that we've seen in our results, I would say there are some good examples of practical measures that some companies, a few companies are taking, and I would say specifically and particularly around gender equality within their workforces, and much less evidence of good practice in terms of community engagement and community impact. So, and some of those measures in the workforce situation relate to companies trying to make working conditions more easier for women to try to balance their work and family life. So, for example, very practical things like making available rooms for their women workers to express and store breast milk, or making their working schedules more family friendly for women and for men who are juggling family life as well as their careers. Another example would be some companies are actually integrating gender diversity key performance indicators, or KPIs, into the remuneration of their senior executives to add incentives to increase the representation of women on their workforces. What we did find, though, we found that where a company is doing better than its peers on gender, it is sometimes linked to an external driver of that gender action. So, for example, the Chilean company Codelco is one of the better performers, not a strong performer, a better performer in terms of preventing harassment and gender-based violence at its mine site. And this is directly linked to a national standard in Chile that has been in place there for about 8 years now, relating specifically to gender equality in the workplace. And of course, it is the implementation and the enforcement of these external drivers that's the real key. So Lydia mentioned the issues with women workers not having adequate PPE in South Africa, and that is despite the fact that there is a national regulation on that in South Africa, and even national guidelines from the government requiring companies to provide mining women workers with adequate PPE. And to your question, Surya, about what else companies can be doing to mainstream gender across their operations, I would say a good starting point for any company would be to start tracking and reporting gender disaggregated data for all of their mine sites. So, for example, does a company know how many local women are on their local workforces at their mine sites? Does it know what proportion of local procurement is coming from women-led businesses? Or does it even know, for example, how many community meetings heard from women as well as men? And with this kind of data, companies can begin to see the gaps and then to take appropriate action. And another key starting point, I think, would be to roll out, as we talked about, gender impact assessments, and to integrate, as the UN Working Group's gender guidance says, to integrate the findings of those impact assessments across the company's policy and practices.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Next, I would like to move on to Vanessa, but I also want to read a question which perhaps Lydia later on may answer. Lydia, the question is that how could these new women in mining committees behave in a male-dominated management? Because you very well highlighted that typically it's a male-dominated industry. So even if you create a women in mining committee, how will this interplay in the context of the dominant male management? How can they get heard and considered and get their voices on the top shelf of the management? So a question for you to reflect, and probably you can answer later. But Vanessa, I would like to turn to you now. And going forward, I mean, based on your initial findings of this pilot, where do you see this index in Guinea going forward? And how do you think this gender guidance of the UN guiding principles could be relevant for you to strengthen and get it implemented through this index and recommendations to the private sector operating in Guinea or in Africa generally? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Surya. So where I see this index is I really hope that Development Gateway will have the opportunity to move from a pilot to a global country-like index. I do agree with Lydia, actually stressed the point that was very important is the monitoring and evaluation part of it. It is true you can have the laws, as Jennifer mentioned, you can have the laws, you can have the strategies, they can be included in the legal framework. what we have noticed is that a lot of those are perfect on paper, but in practice, it's different. Those laws are not applied, those laws are not enforced, they are not monitored, they are not evaluating, and companies are not being sanctioned for not applying this or for not complying to their legal obligations. So I think this is something that should be good. The index is designed or has been designed to actually publish data and disaggregate data on those cross extractive industry issue, including the environment, health, condition, and gender. So reporting, I will actually take it one step further as Jennifer and invite private companies not only to report on their gender figures, but actually to open the data and publish the data on their gender figures so that everybody can know what's going on. Because at least I know in those 3 countries where we were giving the opportunity to work, companies already collect this data and actually they are included in reports. The problem is that those reports are never shared, or they're really shared with like government officials. They're not rendered public. So even like the communities and the civil society organizations who want really to invest or to engage in gender discussions or really trigger gender reforms, they don't even have like the base data that they can actually use that will be able to improve their advocacy. So this is something that I think should not only be reported, but should be published so that even other countries can actually learn from it, because this is, it just joined the EITI norm like in June 2019. So we're all in the learning process, whether it's the companies, the communities, or whatever, and sharing what you're doing and be open about what is it that you're putting in place to make sure that women are protected, their rights are protected, or they even encourage. I think this is really key to make sure that things are going in the right direction. So I really hope that we will be able to have a full-blown country index, not only in Guinea, but in other countries, that will be able to show the positive impact of mining industries or extractive industries, because there are, and we do not want to take one side and have all the private sector thinking that we are here to basically, you know, tell them this is not, you're not doing anything good, you're just doing things the wrong way. This is not the point. It's actually to present facts that will really help like decision making. And that's really where I hope we can go, you know, at country level. And it's not going to be a static index. What we want is that it's going to be an index that's dynamic and that will be assessed and recomputed like on a yearly basis to really measure up the progress of what a country is actually doing to respect, you know, gender equality.
Okay, thank you so much for that response. Now I would like to move on to Daria. And Daria, of course, I would invite you to also reflect what other steps you have taken to protect the human rights of women in relation to the communities or women in communities or part of your workforce that may be impacted. But there's also an interesting question from Anis, which you may wish to reflect. And the question is that as a mining company, what incentives would you prefer to integrate gender considerations better? Because some of these international standards are not legally binding. So as a company, what incentives would you like to see for Polymetal or other companies to integrate gender more vigorously going forward? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. For Polymetal, the big challenge is to supply skilled workers for fly-in, fly-outs, because 50% of our personnel working just like that. They are coming for 3 months and then leaving, or 2 months. And of course, women who have kids are barely agree to take this opportunity. So we work, first of all, with women workers who are willing to work for us, but they cannot afford leaving a child for such a long period. So we provide a special insurance for this kind of women. So this is one of the incentives which I can mention. And Now, when we work with personnel, we work under the labor code. Back in USSR, Russia, Kazakhstan, which were part of the USSR, they abandoned some professions. So there is a list of professions which is abandoned for women. So women cannot drive trucks, they cannot drive trains, they cannot dive in. So those this list of professions is quite long, and it was created to stop women to have hard work, so it doesn't affect their parenting later. But the technologies change and equipment is very well improved now, and it's safe for women. So we are trying to work with governments, and EBRD, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, helped us with that. We have a special programs with them, strategy for gender equality. And in 2015, we started this work together with them, and the strategy was encompassing initiatives which were addressing legal and regulatory bottlenecks for women's participation in the economy, and delivers loans for female entrepreneurs, and was encouraging equal opportunities for women in both in public and private sector. And as a result of this work together, we cut the list of abandoned professions, and now women can work as truck drivers in Russia and in Kazakhstan. So we gradually decreasing the number of abandoned professions, and we want to include to create inclusive conditions for women in Kazakhstan, and especially considering it is Islamic culture, and find a role for women in the economy and in the mining, and help them to change their minds, to change the self perception, to find the leadership inside, to support increasing household income together with men, and to educate them, to train, to give more recognition. You know that most of women find work disappointing when they lack recognition. So we try to find some contest, or just giving them gratitude, or professional celebrate professional holidays with them, bringing the career success to the top, and giving the promotion to these women work. And this is gives us more loyalty from the personal, but also very like heartbreaking stories of women's success. And of course it encourages personnel. And among all
if you don't mind, we can pause here, and probably I'll ask some questions to you later.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, for the question, I just wanted to, maybe a person
Incentives.
can go to the site, yes, incentives, to the website of Polymetal, and there is a labor standard of company, and it has includes all the measures we are doing, like childcare, payment, or etc., etc. So it's all on our website.
I think the question was that what incentives you would like to get as a company, not what incentives you are giving to attract women. As a company, what incentives do you want, so that other companies also integrate gender perspectives better?
The best what we can dream about is the qualified personnel. So if government does enough to educate women and students, it would be a big help for us.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Daria. I would like now to move on to Lydia. And Lydia, I have two interrelated questions. One question is something I think probably Dorothy asked this question, that how do women in mining committees interplay with the male-dominated industry? And the second interrelated question is that what can be done to increase the participation of women in labor unions, trade unions? Because my experience is that when I was doing this report, we did regional consultations globally. And everywhere I went, I was told that trade unions are part of the problem, because they don't put gender issues on the top shelf, because they're dominated by male leadership. So if you can reflect based on your experiences. Thank you. You have the floor now. Please unmute yourself, Lydia. Thank you.
Hello, is that the second question which you gave me?
That's right. Like, what is your experience of encouraging more women in the trade unions so that they have a more dominant role and they can work for gender equality? What could be done?
Thank you. That is a very difficult one,
Okay.
which we have been trying for years. I must say it's that it's hard to find a woman, more especially in my own trade union, as it is male dominated. And we have tried as a trade union, they've put up a structure, which is a woman's structure, to say that they want to ensure that there's gender mainstreaming. But having that structure in there, they did not go back and check that, are they covering their needs? What was the need of the structure? The need of the structure was to ensure that women are participating in the organization itself. But having that structure, when years are going forward, it did not go back to say that, do we have more women taking positions in other structures of the organization? That is not done. So what we need to do is that, one, firstly, I think we had to start with the constitution of the organization itself to say, maybe we come up with a proposal of saying that we recommend that if the president is a man, let there be a woman general secretary, and goes down to deputies if it is a male in the presidency, it must be a female in the law. I think in that we can ensure that there's gender balance. But in as our constitution is standing currently to say that all members in good standing must take any position in this male-dominated trade unions we are finding us in, more especially National Union of Mineworkers, we are not going to get it, I'm assuring you. And the other thing is that change begins with me. And if I want to see change, it has to start with me. We can't point finger at the mining industries to say that they don't transform, and yet us as trade unions, we are not transformed. So we need first to start by us to take the change and say that we want to see change, and change must be seen by us. We cannot preach it, but we don't practice it. That is the main thing that we are lacking as trade unions. We like to point fingers, but we don't do it ourselves. So my advice will be that the constitutions must be changed. I think that's my take in that one.
That is excellent, Lydia. Very powerful message and very specific recommendation. You know, the trade unions should walk the talk. They should not merely expect companies to do that. They should also change. Very good. So Prabindra, if I can come to you, and probably I will frame two questions for you. One question is, what could be done to strengthen the participation of Indigenous women in the consultation or due diligence processes? And I would like to connect it with a question which is posed by Kaylin here. And the question is that what can be done to rebuild trust? And she's using rebuild. So trust has been lost. That is the assumption. So what can be done to rebuild trust between Indigenous communities and mining companies, especially women, since they are often left out in the decision process after decades of exploitation? So if you can combine these two questions into one, and you already have my second question, that the Indigenous communities themselves are not very gender equality. So how do you balance that? And if you can be brief, thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'll answer the second one first. No, I mean it's absolutely correct. Most most indigenous communities are patriarchal. We do not there's, I mean, like, there's no denying to it, no. But also there are indigenous communities that are matrilineal, they are, you know, and matriarchal, no. So it should be noted that colonization, internal or external, intense or, you know, exacerbated gender-based discrimination within indigenous communities. Traditional values or traditional roles of indigenous women, yes, were mostly limited to families, were mostly confined within families, while men went outside, or, like, you know, that is similar to other mainstream dominant societies too. However, particularly with regards to land holdings, the land holdings within indigenous communities were collective, or, like, you know, it wasn't an individual land ownership system. So that way, women also had significant say in how the land was used in the past, no. Unlike currently, when there is current or dominant land holding system, which is individual land ownership system or land holding system, which basically again exacerbates the discrimination against women in decision making, because it's often men that holds the land within the family when the land is titled. Also, not to deny that, you know, indigenous traditional governance systems or decision making systems are mostly male dominated. But we are, you know, given my research in the last decade, I think I see many changes within these traditional institutions too, whereby women are being promoted within these traditional institutions too. They are becoming elders, they are becoming council chiefs, no. Women, which were basically not the roles that they would get in the past. So again, that is just to say that, you know, indigenous communities are also changing. They are not static. But we need to we definitely need to, how do you call it, accelerate it. And that I think one of the ways that is being done is through changes in the written, or, like, you know, changes in the as Lydia earlier said, constitutional changes within trade unions, but also value change within indigenous systems. There are indigenous organizations that are making it necessary to have equal participation of women in their decision-making structure. No, there are indigenous communities or traditional institutions that are developing their policies, or, you know, gender policies, or women's participation policies, and also enacting them efficiently. And here also to be noted is indigenous women are powerful leaders who are mostly often in the front lines when communities are confronting these destructive mining projects. No, so that's basically
good.
That's basically,
you can move to the other question now.
Yes, that's basically to say that, you know, there is change, and but the women empowerment needs to be further accelerated. Now, to rebuild the trust, which is a correct assumption again. I think there are steps that the states need to take, you know, with historical reconciliation, apologies to indigenous communities, or like represents to indigenous communities for the age-old or the centuries of the exploitation against indigenous communities. But the companies can also take proactive measures. Again, that's what I would say here. No. There is a report by the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, former Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Mr. James Anaya, who did this report on how extractive industries, particularly in North America, where, you know, there is this historical basically kind of a divide between indigenous Native American or First Nation communities in Canada and USA, and the mining companies. So one of the ways that the Special Rapporteur suggested was to promote indigenous-led mining or community-led mining. No, he in his report he found that these companies that are often led or established with participation of indigenous communities have better chances of success or less impacts on communities. So that could be one way. Again, the second thing could be better impact assessments on the communities done with the communities, so that it is not too late to address those impacts later in the stages of mining. And that should also definitely include gender impact assessments to look at specific impacts that could happen on women, indigenous women. Then the third thing I think would be the benefit sharing. Often indigenous peoples, they have most to lose by losing their resources, but very little to gain by through the exploitation of these resources. So I think companies need to come up with strong benefit sharing packages since the design of the project itself. And all of this, if I can put it in a nutshell, just one last thing is what we call, in indigenous communities, to let go of corporate greed, because they see a lot of profit. They want to earn as much profit as possible with very little investment, or little negotiations done in the capital, or with more exploitation done at the communities. So I think letting go of corporate greed, if you can see that in a transformative way, as you said it, then that could also be the answer.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we are almost towards the end of our webinar. We only have 6-7 minutes left. So in this brief time, I would like to give the floor to all the panelists once again. I am going to pose a question because I'm trying to take as many questions as possible. But this time, your response should not be longer than 1 minute each, please. So I'll start with Vanessa. And there's an interesting question for you directly from Veronica. And the question is, to what extent are the domestic laws in Guinea consistent with the international standards? So are the domestic laws influenced by the international progressive standards on gender or human rights? So if you can respond to that, and if you have any final words about parting words, where should we be going after this webinar? Thank you, Vanessa.
So to answer Veronica's question, Guinea have gender policy, national gender policy that has been in effect, I think, 2011. Though that gender policy is, of course, it was something that was developed with the support of UNDP, I think, or UNIFEM, one of the UN agencies, that's for sure. However, it's not specific to the mining sector. It's actually a gender policy that's actually transversal, and that's like cross-sector. So we have that. I know that the legal framework also has been revised, and it's one of the strongest I've seen so far with this position, with local, the hiring of local small to medium-sized enterprises and stuff. And I think, yes, this has been done also with, it is our understanding that it was something that was supported by the World Bank, and also something that was done with private law firms, which maybe that can explain actually the strength of this legal framework. So I hope that answers your question. As far as a final word, I think there are two things that should be, that if we could do something, really make as much data that we can use available to all of us, whether it's private companies, think tanks, foundations, trade unions, civil society. It has been my small experience, and actually having data helps a lot, even if it's to start the conversation going, because we're starting a conversation going on facts and not on preconceptions or on beliefs, or because that's never efficient. And like I said, a context is a context, and
yeah.
I
think we need to.
Yeah, a context is a context. So definitely that will be my final role. Let's try to make as much evidence public as possible.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I would now like to move to Daria, and any final words that you would like to share. Also, it's up to you if you can quickly respond to a question from Jean. That do you see the buyer's side have a role to play in better gender balanced representation in the mining sector? Because you have some buyers of your mining products, right? So whether they have a role to play, if you want to answer that question, but it has to be very quick, and your final words. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think I will start with the question that we sell our products, which are golden bars or silver bars, to banks. So we usually trade them through the exchange. So of course we have no issues on any gender balance there. And we also sell concentrate to different countries.
I think the question, if I reframe the question is whether the banks which are buying your gold bar, can they ask you, okay, we will buy from you only if you do ABC? That is the question.
I don't think that it concerns our products, because we
Okay.
mine precious metals, and it's kind of like material which is not easily found and mined. So I don't think they have many options. You know,
Okay.
if they say no to us, they probably will be left without it. But since we have many women in our board of directors, so I think we are quite a unique company. Here we have 33% of females among senior managers. So we can accept buyers of any prejudices. So it's no problem. And you asked where we should go after this webinar. I think we should all go to educate our girls. We need to encourage youngsters. We need to motivate those employees who are already working, and of course we need to recognize those who have already passed some career years. So that would be my final words to this webinar.
Thank you so much, Daria. Lydia, if I could go to you and ask the same question, why your final thoughts? There's also a question about race, and because this is quite an issue in the world at this point of time, so I would like to throw this question to you. This question is from Juliana, and the question is that I am facing the problem in South Africa. I was not given a job because I'm white, and I had all the experience and qualifications. So what is the union doing there? So if you want to take up this question and your final words, but very briefly, please. Thank you.
Sorry to hear that, my brother, that you've been discriminated because of race. And unfortunately in South Africa, we're facing a racial problem whereby all top positions, most top positions are held by white people. And we are so sorry, and it's unfortunate for us that we are trying our level best to change the situation which is in, but it is not easy to change it because people are hanging up on their positions. People don't want to change. And if we must address that issue, it had to start with the current bosses of the mine bosses who are there currently, to ensure that they change who they are and what they are, and their practices of ensuring that they balance all races. But in as far as race is concerned, it's a matter of the mine bosses to change their mindset and accept any race as equal. Not unless that is changed, nothing is going to change, because currently we are having legislations which are saying that we must have certain percentages of Black people to managerial positions. That is not done. And unfortunately, that will block a white person to come to mining industry, because once there are job opportunities, then Employment Equity Act kicks in. And if it finds that there's high rate of white people in the company and having higher positions, that itself, it blocks the employment of whites to come in. Unfortunately, it's the doing of the current mine bosses. So they had to change.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but we're running short of time. So Prabindra, 30 seconds. Any final thoughts that you would like to give us? And then I will ask Jennifer to wrap up this webinar. You have the floor,
So
Prabindra.
yes, in 30 seconds, I think. So since my engagement with the Responsible Mining Foundation to develop the index, since 2016 as part of the expert review committee, that designed the methodology, I think what we understood so far while designing this index also was that policies and commitment by the companies are the first step. They should not just end with having a policy and not acting upon it. Those policies and commitments need to be in line with the highest international standards or best practices at the international standards. And what we saw from the gender findings, particularly with regards to gender impacts assessments, absence of gender impact assessments is self-revealing. So I think that is one thing where the companies should be moving on to next, that they should have policies on gender impact assessments, and that should again be effectively implemented. And particularly for indigenous communities, that since I'm speaking on behalf of them, again I would repeat that indigenous communities should not be looked at just as participants or residents of the project site, but they should be looked at as stakeholders, key stakeholder, as well as decision maker of what should happen in that project site. So community-based impact assessments.
I think
is
it can't be better
one way
than
to
this.
go. Yeah, sorry.
I think your last sentence was very powerful. So probably, I'm sorry, but I think that was a very good message. Jennifer, if I could give you the floor, thank you very much for everything. We're running short of time. In fact, we have already gone beyond our formal time. So it's up to you. There was also a question from Jyoti Raj about to what extent your findings are taken on board by the government. So if you want to respond to that question, up to you, or any final words. You have the floor now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Surya. And maybe in the interest of time, I will give my final reflections first of all. And I would just like to say I completely agree with what Vanessa was talking about in terms of the importance of transparency and for accountability purposes in particular. So we do definitely support the public disclosure, public reporting of gender-related data. And actually, more than that, even reporting that goes along the lines of open data principles, including making the data available for local stakeholders, women and men, to be able to access it, use it, and understand it. And within our RMI report, we have one section of the assessment that looks at mine site assessment. And we have actually tailored all those questions around whether companies are making data available to local communities, and whether they're in fact then going on to start the conversation, as Vanessa said, to actually engage with companies on those issues. So again, those issues cover everything from air and water quality to local procurement, local employment, and other issues. So then, moving on just to close our web event now, I would like to just thank all of our panelists for your wonderful participation today, and many thanks indeed. And a special thanks also to Surya for leading our discussions and for sharing your own reflections. So thank you. And I hope that you all as participants have found the event useful, and you've each taken something away that you'll be able to go back with to your own organization. We at RMF, for ourselves, we try to make the data available, and hopefully you will have seen the gender research insight we put out yesterday on gender inequality run deep in mining. And we make the data available, and we really rely on groups of people like yourselves to use it and to share it and to help drive continuous improvement. So with that, I wish you all a good day, and please do keep in touch. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.